There are three types of student groupings: homogeneous, heterogeneous, and flexible ability grouping. The first type of grouping is homogeneous grouping, also known as tracking or ability grouping. This type of grouping is assigning a student to classes or a group based on academic ability and achievement. These types of groups are usually formed based on a certain criteria and allows for grouping of gifted and talented students. Powell talks about the many arguments for and against this type of grouping. Many people argue it provides lower achieving students the attention and slower pace they need, and higher achieving students challenges. On the other hand, others argue it hurts the self-esteem of lower achievers and is detrimental to peer relationships. The next type of grouping is heterogeneous ability grouping. This is where students in any given class or group represent the spectrum of ability levels in the school and student population. This type of grouping benefits from having all different types of learners in it. The students all learn new material and use each other and their different perspectives to find solutions or achieve learning. The last type of grouping is flexible ability grouping. Whereas tracking or homogeneous grouping calls for static groups, flexible ability grouping calls for grouping and regrouping that meets individual learning needs. These groups of students are arranged based on readiness, learner profiles, or interests. This type of grouping also uses combinations of whole group, small group, and independent work. Wormley argues it is essential for teachers to use all three types to achieve the highest level of learning. When grouping according to readiness level, we often group like-minded students together. Wormley says we don't want students to struggle with the assessment format or with their expression of content. Because of this, we might group students by similar academic strengths when asking them to demonstrate mastery. He also discusses student interests as a way to form groups. Some of these interests may include things like hobbies, backgrounds, sports, and musical groups. Allowing students to use their personal interests to learn makes work more meaningful and more likely to be stored in long-term memory. Finally, Wormley discusses grouping students according to learner profiles. This means grouping according to multiple intelligences, personality types, learning styles, and similar attributes that make their learning unique. This requires teachers to know their students well and place them in groups where they will thrive off each other.
Hello and welcome to 321 News. Thanks for joining us today.
Today we'll be talking about the Ohio standards for the teaching profession and how they relate to student grouping.
The first standard that we're going to be talking about today is standard number 1. This states that teachers understand student learning and development and respect the diversity of the students they teach. Teachers expect that all students will achieve their full potential. They model respect for students' diverse cultures, language skills, and experiences. They also display knowledge of how students learn and of the developmental characteristics of each particular age group. When dealing with student grouping in standard number 1, teachers must understand how each student functions, whether it be in a large group setting, a small group setting, a paired setting, or individually. Each student has to be able to function to the best of their ability, and that is the teacher's job to find out how to do so.
The next standard we're going to talk about is standard 4. Teachers plan and deliver effective instruction that advances the learning of each individual student. This includes teachers using information about students' learning and performance to plan and deliver instruction that will close the achievement gap. It also includes differentiating instruction from the needs of all students, including students identified as gifted, students with disabilities, and at-risk students. This standard relates to student grouping because teachers have to plan ahead on which students to put in which groups so that they can achieve their fullest potential. This also includes students who are at risk, gifted students, or special needs students.
The last standard that we found relatable to student grouping is standard number 5. This states that teachers create learning environments that promote high levels of learning and achievement for all students. In other words, teachers treat all students fairly and establish an environment that is respectful, supportive, and caring. When dealing with student grouping, a teacher must be respectful, must be positive, in order to create an environment for people to take risks in any type of group they may be involved in.
My teacher is a high school English teacher, and she did a lot of whole class groupings, a lot of individual reading and then coming together and discussing it.
I used it when I student taught at Thurgood Marshall. I used a think, pair, share, so that was fun. That worked really well. The students got involved.
Experiencing student grouping in the field, I witnessed large group, I witnessed small group. We did think, pair, shares, we did individual for assessments. Personally, when I taught my 3 lessons, I usually kind of let them group into small groups of 2 or 3 to kind of get the juices flowing, like let them talk it out with each other.
Okay.
But
I used student grouping during my lesson plans. I used whole groups, small group, and also worked with students individually. And then I experienced my cooperating teacher using heterogeneous grouping, mixing all types of students together.
One particular thing I remember is a project the kids did. They made a paper mache animal, and they worked with like groups of 5, and they really grew throughout that whole process, which really opened my eyes to the experience of different ways to use student grouping. Next, we have made connections to in-task standards. The first connection we made is to standard number 1, which is learner development. This can relate highly to standard number 1 of the Ohio Teaching Standards. It states that teachers understand how learners grow and develop, recognizing that patterns of learning and development vary individually within and across the cognitive, linguistic, social, emotional, and physical areas. The next standard that we connected this to is standard number 2, which is learning differences. This is when the teacher uses understanding of individual differences and diverse cultures and communities to ensure inclusive learning. This also is very similar to the Ohio Learning Standards and how you need to use student grouping to adjust to those learning differences. Standard number 3 is learning environments, and that's when the teacher works with others to create environments that support individual and collaborative learning. That way, if you use individual learning, a teacher can have the environment being safe and risk-taking for one student working alone, or if you use collaborative learning in a large group setting, you need to make sure that students are willing to take risks and learn with each other and feel comfortable to do that in a large group setting. Standard number 7 is planning for instruction, and this is when the teacher plans instruction that supports every student in meeting rigorous learning goals by drawing upon knowledge of content areas, curriculum, cross-disciplinary skills, and pedagogy, as well as knowledge of learners and the community context. This helps a teacher plan for instruction when she figures out which grouping to use. That way it will be most beneficial for each student. Standard number 8 states about instructional strategies, and that is when the teacher understands and uses a variety of instructional strategies to encourage learners to develop deep understanding of content areas and their connections, and to build skills to apply knowledge in meaningful ways.
EDT.